Thanks for joining us today here on Kentucky's Voice. Jim Waters with you, as I am most Wednesdays here, and most importantly, we're glad to have you with us. And also, our next guest here today, Joey Comley, Kentucky Director of Right on Crime, joins us. And Right on Crime is a national campaign of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, which seeks to advance conservative criminal justice reforms that reduce crime, restore victims, lower taxpayer costs, and prioritize public safety and accountability. Joey, thanks today for taking some time out of your busy day and schedule. I know you've got a busy afternoon as well with, I think, Congressman Guthrie. You're going to be with him today. So we're glad to have you, though, take a few minutes here to talk about what's going on in the criminal justice policy here and reform. We read some of your op-ed there in the last segment, and this editorial in the Louisville Courier-Journal, which came out, I believe, last Friday, takes on the system of fines and fees in Kentucky. I don't remember seeing anybody talk about this, Joey. This is an interesting topic, and I learned some things I didn't know here, and I have some questions, but, someone says, I don't really care about doing anything to help out criminals. If they go to jail because they don't pay, then so be it. Let them go to jail. But you're saying that even if we look at our current policies, even from strictly a taxpayer's point of view, it's not working. It's a bad policy. So why should taxpayers care about the fines and fees system in Kentucky?
Jim, first, thanks for having me. And today's a busy day, but that's nothing new. And that's a good thing, right?
Right.
Being busy is always a good thing. That's at least what my father said.
Well, mine told me it keeps me out of trouble. So,
That's true, too. I would say that any taxpayer, whether you're conservative or liberal or anything in between, should always be concerned about where their money is going and what it's being spent for. So the hopes in our fines and fees effort from last General Assembly was to simply open the door to allow for transparency, and then potentially knowledge and what flows next, accountability, right?
Right.
We'll never know if those funds are truly being utilized in an effective manner until we know how they're being spent and who they're being spent by. When we talk about fines and fees, it's not a hot topic. It's not something that typically drives a bunch of attention from the General Assembly, but from the taxpayer who realizes that they are funding everyone's stay in a Kentucky jail or prison. They should want to know, number one, why they're funding it, where those funds are actually going, how they're being spent, and where they could otherwise be spent. You're talking about a system with respect to incarceration that routinely drains a county's general funds.
Yeah, which the purpose of the fee, and I guess let's talk about that too, how inefficient this is. The purpose of the fines and fees is what? And also, does this affect people even maybe that haven't even been convicted of crimes yet? Is this, persons incarcerated, are these fees, does this apply to them as well?
Absolutely. So you're talking about people that are jailed on offenses that are pending potentially felony indictment or disposition. So pre-disposition, fines and fees rack up just the same. When someone's awaiting trial, they're still incarcerated. And those that aren't incarcerated might be on some type of, pretrial release, whether it's, home incarceration or another monitoring system. They're still accumulating daily fines and fees.
Yeah. So if they owe something here, and this is really mixed up, if they owe something, they actually get relieved of debt. Many inmates do get relieved of the debt they owe according to how many days they're incarcerated, whereas the taxpayer is paying nearly the same amount for that and is not benefiting from that. Talk about how that works and why why that matters.
Let's talk about the great irony there, right, Jim? Because we assume that a fine and a fee is meant to restore something, to restore either the harm done to society, the community, the victim in that case, or just to simply pay for the cost of operating the system. Yet at the same time, if we're incarcerating someone, and by virtue of their incarceration, we're relieving them of that debt, well, then the average Kentucky citizen is actually paying twice. They're paying for the cost of incarceration, and they're paying the cost of relieving that person of their debt at the same time.
Right. So, the people who want to get tough on crime, this isn't working to do that either. This isn't good policy. You talk about too how this tends to affect lower income citizens. Maybe those who don't have can't wiggle out of some things legally or don't have those resources. And so I think, and this is it not a reason to be even more concerned about this? Because, our justice systems should be applied fairly across the board. And we know it's not perfect, but that should be the goal anyhow. And that should be the aim. And when we find policies that disproportionately affect the poor or underserved, then that's a cause for concern as well, isn't it?
I believe so. And Jim, the people of the Commonwealth are kind people. And I've told you this before, both as a friend and in exchanges in this forum. Kentucky is filled with the kindest people that I ever met in any state and in any country that I was ever stationed in. And that's why my family and I came back and settled here. That said, they're intelligent people, and they don't like being taken advantage of. And that's exactly what this system does.
Yeah. Well, you also talk about how this type of system benefits for-profit prison corporations. I guess for-profit's not a bad thing. We believe in that, when it's true free market capitalism. But in this case, you're talking about how these corporations take advantage of low-income Kentuckians, those who are behind bars. Talk about that for a second, and kind of some of the real disparities there in costs of items that they're benefiting from for inmates that buy those.
Yeah, I think in my article I pulled two examples. One was a hairbrush, and I think the other was a brassiere for females. The cost disparity there, I think the comparison was $1 and some change for the hairbrush at any of your Dollar Trees or your DGs locally. And I think in prison, it was almost $10. It was $8 and some change. Yeah, right. $8.25.
Yeah.
And then the brassiere that could be purchased on Amazon was $8. But in the prison system, it was $43. So when you think about some of our most impoverished Kentuckians having to pay 5 to 8 times as much for a common item that they have to have on a daily basis because they're incarcerated, that just doesn't make any sense to anybody.
Yeah.
And
you're
go
right.
ahead.
Yeah. No, you're right. It's I did not realize that was going on. That disparity was there. So we're talking with Joey Comley, Kentucky Director of Right on Crime, who's with us today. And Joey, we've got just about 30 seconds left in this segment, but I'd like to, if you can stay over for one more segment, I'd like to talk to you about maybe some solutions here and some ideas you have about what can be done to address this, and also what you see as priorities coming up in the 2026 legislative session, helping our folks understand what's good conservative criminal justice policy. I think we can do it here. I think we can implement good policy that works and is and does protect the public at the same time, reduces crime. That should be our goal across the board. Who is the Kentucky Director of Right on Crime. It's a great national organization that focuses on conservative policies, and they have several state groups, and we're so delighted to have them here in Kentucky, and Joey's doing a great job, and we appreciate you coming on today, Joey, and talking a few minutes about some of these policies. And I want to make this more of a regular occurrence here because there's a lot going on. I think that conservative and our audience this is an audience of people who want to know what is the conservative angle, what is going on with to make us safer and to reduce crime. I think most conservatives want both those things to happen, and you certainly have made that a priority in your work here, and we appreciate what you're doing. Let's talk a little bit about, you talked before the break and made a good point about just so much of this about fine, and we're talking about the fines and fees in that are charged to inmates and how that works and in our prison system. But so much of this, isn't it, as you said, is just knowing what's happening, more transparency in terms of the funds, how they're being used, how much there is, what they're being spent on, and how they're being spent. And you talked a little bit about that with what it costs a prisoner to buy a hairbrush versus folks on the outside that aren't facing that. It really should be the opposite of anything, shouldn't it? I mean, people who are in jail, they don't have income, they don't have a job, many cases, and yet they're bearing the brunt of this. It just seems really mixed up. But where do we start? I think transparency is what you're saying. We start there to solve some of these policies and make them better.
That's correct, Jim. What we're looking for here in this effort, this legislation, is simply to open the door to the taxpayers, right? To let them see how their money is being spent, where their contributions are going, and to potentially let lawmakers who represent them come up with a better way of doing things. For example, you talked about a hairbrush because it was mentioned in the piece that I wrote for the Courier Journal. Jim, you and I don't need the same hairbrush if we're incarcerated. It doesn't need a name brand. It probably doesn't need a comfortable handle,
right?
But I'd like it to go through my hair.
Yeah, right.
So it can be a much cheaper version of what we might use on a day-to-day when we're in, the confines of our own home.
Yeah. And as we said earlier, we're not opposed to profit, but when it's taxpayer dollars being spent, we need to know what kind of hairbrush it is, because if that's the issue here, we need to do more transparency about what kind of hairbrush it is. Might save taxpayers a lot of dollars if somebody was embarrassed by what kind of a hairbrush was being sold to inmates. That certainly can be an effective tool. Maybe we need some of that here. There was some transparency legislation passed earlier, I guess, this year in the last session, which was earlier here in 2025, that does require the Corrections Department to give some more information about folks who have been incarcerated, some information there. Is that going to be a bill that really gives us information that can help us create better policy, Joey? Is that going to make a difference?
Jim, I think any policy solution that is delivered by any responsible authority in the absence of information is bad policy. So I would assume that any information that we get out of the executive branch as it operates and spends the money that we give them, that's all good information, right? It informs future decisions. It informs existing policy, right? Because we have laws that are passed all over the Commonwealth or in existence for a number of years. Like, for example, Senate Bill 90 has to be renewed, or at least in terms of its funding, has to be reviewed and approved this budget cycle. So that's another example of just existing policy where we have to look at the money that was initially made available for that programming, see how much of it was spent, examine how it was spent, and then determine if we need to allocate more money for it or if there's still money available and we can potentially do more with it.
Yeah. Uh, so let's talk about your priorities in terms of this coming year, this coming session. We're into the interim now where all the committees are beginning to meet and decide what their policy priorities are going to be for the session. What can you tell us about that? And when Right on Crime, the national group, when they look at Kentucky, how do they see us compared to the rest of the nation when it comes to these common sense criminal justice reform policies? And how does that play into what the priorities are going to be? How's that help determine that?
So you asked about three questions there. I'm going to unpack it a little bit. I think the priorities for this next legislative session for Right on Crime here in Kentucky include fines and fees transparency. It's absolutely essential that taxpayers know how their money is being spent by the government. Number two is some clean slate legislation that simply eases the enactment of laws that have been on our books for about 30 years now. This is a technological solution to implement the law that otherwise keeps some of our folks who are looking for employment opportunities from, being able to check the block. No, I've not been convicted of a criminal offense in the last so many years. It simply enables automation to work through eligible offenses. These are all nonviolent offenses, and these are all people who have not committed any further infractions or violations of the law in the last 5 years. It enables them to seek meaningful employment and to truly be, contributors and beneficial members of our communities. The third thing I'd really like to see pass this session is we called it last year, the Family Preservation and Accountability Act. Really, it's caregiver consideration. So it's simply the legislature telling all judges, and granted, some judges are already doing this because they're doing great work on the bench all across the Commonwealth. But not every judge is doing this. And what we're asking them to do is to say, hey, when you get to the point of sentencing a nonviolent offender, you're to examine whether or not they're a caregiver of a dependent child. And you're supposed to consider that when you deliver a sentence. Because if I get sentenced to incarceration, Jim, I leave a home where I'm not only the spiritual leader, but I'm a father of 3 children.
Yeah.
So what happens to my children? Yeah. They suffer and they lose. Now, God forbid, my wife isn't here to pick up the slack, which she easily could because she's an amazing woman. Yeah. But if she wasn't here, the state would pick up that slack.
Yeah.
And now 2 of my 3 kids are in a state system while I'm also in the state system. And think about the utter waste there.
Yeah.
Think about the consequences to the child, to the family, to the community. I mean, it is unbelievable that we don't already have something on the books that calls for every judge who's examining a sentence to make that determination and then account for that. Consider it or determine that, look, based on the facts and circumstances of this case and the role that this individual plays in their home, I don't think it's relevant, or I do.
Yeah, I really like this because I think, and that's where we should allow judges to have some flexibility and to really be able to look at the situation, because there's really probably not 2 situations that are exactly the same and involve exactly the same issues. So I really like that, where we're going with that.
It's one more tool, Jim.
Sure.
Right? I mean, if we want to talk about this in tool sets,
right.
The first bill gives one more tool to the taxpayer, lets him and her know how their money's being spent. The second bill gives one more tool to employers so that they can actually run their small businesses and they can hire Kentucky's talent.
Yeah.
Number 3, it gives one more tool to the judges.
Right, and I think that's appropriate. And so those are three really good issues. Let's follow them. We're going to follow them during the session. We'll get some updates. If you don't mind taking a couple of comments off of our text line here, we've got a couple of minutes left. Joey Comley, who is the Kentucky director of Right on Crime here, and thanks for joining us today, Joey, and the great work you do.